to Radio Row at Super Bowl 57. On behalf of Sports Philanthropy Network, sitting here with Caleb Bradham, I'm Roy Kessel, and we're very excited to have with us special guest Joanne Pasternack. Joanne has a long tenured career in sports philanthropy and using sports to improve communities and do good in so many different aspects of the world. So Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roy. Happy to be back here again. Last year in LA, and now here we are in Phoenix.
So one thing Kayla and I often look at and we talk about is how fortunate we are to deal with great people that are making an impact in their communities. And really, you've been out there for a long time, probably before most people were familiar with the phrase sports philanthropy. And
I thought you were going to say before people were born. I'm glad you didn't say that.
That probably wouldn't reflect well on me. I'm as the oldest one here, probably. But you really were in that space long before that phrase was popular or CSR was popular. And so talk a little bit about how you started in this area and what drew you to the sports philanthropy world.
Roy, you're absolutely right. This field has evolved significantly over the last 15 years. In fact, when I first started, I started as the Director of Community Relations for the San Francisco 49ers after having spent a number of years working in city government and working for Special Olympics at their global headquarters. But for me, it was always about helping people to find their purpose and their passion and then to elevate their voices around that. The challenge at the time was that many of the corporate partnerships that were being orchestrated by the sports teams, the philanthropy part was an afterthought. They'd come to my door, knock on it, and say, "Hey, Joanne, we just sold this deal, and we need you to activate in schools and do a variety of things." Instead of getting ahead of it and saying, "How do we align with the core central purpose for the philanthropic investments for that corporation?" Nowadays, there isn't a single corporate partnership in the world of sports that doesn't have a philanthropic component integrated into it, which provides really valuable funding, it provides visibility, and it provides the continuity that you need in order to be successful and create transformational change versus just handing off the big check and going on your way.
Well, we saw that firsthand this past Monday, and I want Kayla to jump in and talk a little bit about the financial literacy program that we did at a high school here in West Phoenix. And it's so important, as you said, to not just hand off a check and run away, so to speak, but to really be in a position where it makes a difference in these kids' lives, not only in the short term, but something that's going to stick with them afterwards. And so, Kayla, I want you to talk about, that concept as you put the event together for the financial literacy program and the elements that went into building that.
Well, I think Joanne's definitely the expert at it, and you know better than most people, Joanne. It's like if we're really going to create hope and possibility for the community, the best way to create that impact is by using the people that the community love. And we all know sports unite, right? So we were super blessed in our case because we're not stuck within the silo of the leagues, that we were able to have a 3-time World Series baseball coach. We were to have a woman from the Afghan women's soccer team. We were able to have a world record female bodybuilder, a bunch of NFL alumni, NFL Hall of Fame nominees, you name it. That list just went on and on. Major League Soccer, and when we can unite the community and give them something to cheer for, and do something really important like teach financial literacy, and do something even more important like feeding kids where 98% of the kids in the school receive free or reduced breakfast and lunch, to really create impact, right? And that's what sports does. It's not a branding thing necessarily, it's not a marketing thing, it's definitely not a gimmick. I'd like you to speak about the way that sports organizations are using these foundations, not just for marketing, certainly that's a part of it, but really I believe in the people that I speak with, that their hearts are for the charities and causes that they personally support. Would you agree?
I wholeheartedly agree, but I would say that we can think of it as a marketing initiative. We can think of it as visibility. There is a bit of a gimmick only because what we know is that there is no obligation to do things that are philanthropic. In fact, almost, I mean, with the exception of a few leagues, there are very few appearance requirements related to philanthropic programming. But what I always say to athletes I work with is, you might not have an obligation to do this, but what a missed opportunity if you don't. You have a platform. What are you going to do with it? The other thing is it's interesting. I come from the Jewish faith. I was raised in an environment where you don't brag about your good deeds. My grandmother would have said "kinahura" and spit on the ground 3 times, just like that. But along those lines, it's not our natural inclination to come out and say, "Hey, look at what I'm doing." But one of the things that I share with a lot of the athletes I work with who are so humble, and they say, I don't want that spotlight. That's not why I'm doing it. But what we want is we want the spotlight on them so that the young people and other members of our community look up to them and say, hey, you know what? It's cool because he's doing it or she's doing it, and I want to do it too. So if you're trying to put replicable behavior out there, why not make it replicable behavior that is for furthering all these initiatives? Financial literacy is a great example of a program where it's, I wouldn't say kids like jump up and down when you're like, hey, we're gonna do a financial literacy workshop. They're like, great. Like, does that mean I get money? No. Okay. But when you say, hey, do you wanna jump in and do this really fun exercise with a bunch of heroes from your favorite team? And by the way, from the corporate social responsibility perspective, let's layer in one of our great banking partners. And I mean, Kayla, if like, I'll give a specific example. A program that the San Jose earthquakes did, which I thought was phenomenal, was focused on financial literacy in partnership with Wells Fargo. They were trying to reach communities that were underserved in Salinas, Monterey County, that area, and were majority Spanish speaking families. They were offering small business loans that were perfectly suited for individuals who are in business for themselves in the Hispanic community. And so they did financial literacy workshops in the schools, but they did a corollary to it, which was a project for the parents as well. So this is why you have a bank account, this is how you invest. And the partnership there was so incredible because they also tied it back to soccer. So now they're talking about shots on goal. How do you look at different elements of math in soccer and physics in soccer? And then how are you going to hold back before you surge forward, and how that relates to investments? So now we've made learning math and learning about financial investments fun, but they've also done something that's of community benefit, because if your family is able to have a small business loan or to open up something that can create economic resiliency for the long term, it's phenomenal. And the players could relate to it. So when you're doing these philanthropic programs, it's incredibly important to make sure that you aren't just randomly picking an athlete and saying like, hey, can you come talk about financial literacy? Because what you'll get is somebody who stands up and says, I'm so and so, and financial literacy is really important. And kids see right through that. If instead you have a guy or a gal who comes up and they say, in my family, we struggled and we didn't trust banks because of this, that, and the other. But here's what I've learned about saving money, about investing, and you can do it too, because my family experienced what your family's experiencing. Then kids really start to listen, because if they look at them not just as a larger than life hero, but as somebody who's relatable, who was once where they were, then they can see themselves marching that same path as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so important when you talked about it. I love the initial concept of using that. I describe it as positive peer pressure, right? So it's not
Yeah.
that you're doing it to brag about, hey, here's what I gave or here's what I accomplished. In fact, some of the best reactions we had from the students on Monday were stories from individuals that had relatively high profile fails like in their
Hmm.
lives. They had gone through struggles that they were willing to open up and share and talk to these kids. And we had 10 athletes speaking, and one of the things that hit me was how many of them complimented the students for their demeanor and behavior and how attentive they were, because these are individuals that speak at schools all over the country on an ongoing basis. So for that many of them to identify these kids and these students in particular as being above that level really says something about Ray Perkins and the Towson High School and the school that they and the
Mhm.
demeanor that they put together. And I love what you were saying, Joanne, because it's so many elements go into this that you're talking about the financial literacy. You brought in the STEM education components. Um, Regular literacy programs. We see so much opportunity to use the power of sports to get
Mhm.
kids' attention and keep their attention because I'll speak for myself. I think Kayla will let me speak for her. She can speak for herself if she wants, but neither of us have long attention spans. We're up and around and moving and doing things all the time. So sitting somewhere and
I
listening
can
for
relate to
90
that.
minutes, listening for 90 minutes, that's a challenging amount of time without moving, without being on your phone, without doing things. So
Sure.
I think it's really important. The other area, Jan, I know you've done a lot of work in that I think is crucial. We have so many athletes here in this room today on Radio
Mhm.
Row. We get approached all the time about athletes wanting to start their own foundation. There's a variety of ways to make an impact. I'd love you to share how you see that particular issue, both for good
Mhm.
and for bad, like the pros of starting an individual foundation, and then some of the other structures that are out there that may be potentially more beneficial and less risky.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you may have had a momentary loss of Wi-Fi there. So, to reiterate, the question is, what is the benefit of athletes creating fiscal partnerships as they're trying to engage in philanthropic activity? Um, if I went to law school, I could help people create 501(c)(3)s, which are verified nonprofit organizations. But if I use my degree for anything, it's to convince people not to create their own 501(c)(3)s, but rather to find fiscal partners who can help them to do the philanthropic work that they so want to do without the risk and the liability that comes along with creating your own independent nonprofit. The great thing about organizations like the Giving Back Fund and others, is that they can lend their 501(c)(3) status to get you up off the ground, get you doing what you want to do, and get you out there quicker than if you're trying to wait through that process. And there are so many ways that you can make a misstep. Like, one of the examples is how many athletes have created foundations where the board of directors is comprised of people who are members of their family, or people who have a financial interest in the well-being of the organization. And once you have people who have a financial interest in something, it really undercuts the ability to make decisions that are wise, that are rational, and that are related to what your outcomes and desired outcomes are. So that's one of the elements that we try to work on. I love how there's so much activity behind us, and I feel like I could just reach behind and push somebody. This is Radio Row is an amazing, amazing place here at Super Bowl, primarily because we're standing here and there are just all sorts of folks wandering around. But what I want to highlight is that every single person in this room has something they care about. There's a cause, or there's a moment in their life where everything changed for them. And what we do through fiscal partnerships is we're able to create a place and a space for them to share that message without having to go through the rigors of creating a 501(c)(3). So there are many pitfalls, but there are organizations that exist to make that much easier. And once athletes leave their team, they have an opportunity to do something philanthropic. We're trying to encourage them to find better places to do that. Thank you. So
I have a question for you. Yeah, sorry about that. I apologize.
that's all right.
Lot of busyness here on
I know.
Radio Row. Um, Joanne, outside of what you're doing, I know you're committed to a lot of endeavors, and I want to give you just a moment to promote some of the things that you're working on in the space at large. Because I see your shirt. I know maybe not everybody who's
Here we go.
watching the video can see, but can you just take a second and read it?
Sure. No, I mean, yeah, we don't need to do
Yeah,
that,
no,
right?
we don't need to do that. That's not.
That's only a man would do that, right? Like, let's put the camera
These
down.
are
Um,
these are
I love it.
family
No, no,
family
this is
friendly.
yeah, this is a shirt. I wear this shirt actually more than I probably should. It's well washed and well loved, but it's talking about the different ways that we can include voices in sport, whether it's LGBTQIA, if it's women, We look at ableism, and all of those areas are being addressed through our Athletes Voices program, which is affiliated with athletes across the full spectrum. So we have everybody from Billy Beane of Major League Baseball fame, who talks out about LGBTQIA and inclusion, Chris Waddell, the most decorated Paralympic athlete of all time, um, guys like Patrick Willis, a future Hall of Famer, and David West and Steve Kerr. I mean, these are people who have voices they want to share, and we provide them with a forum where they can develop a playbook so that when the mic is in their face, they're able to speak in a way that really feels authentic, but they can hone in on what the cause is that's most important to them and focus on that as well. Oh, thank you for the plug. So it's interesting as we talk about different voices and those that are not heard as loudly. I brought a little prop today. I'm a very, very, very proud big sister, but my brother wrote a book. It's called You're Not Welcome Here, and it's actually focusing on homophobia and discrimination, anti-Semitism, and other issues in baseball. So looking at the exclusionary practices in the game of baseball and where there are opportunities for growth and development. One of the elements I find really interesting about this book and why he wrote it was because there were voices that hadn't been heard. Even in a world where there are books on everything, he interviewed people like Wilmer Aaron, Hank Aaron's cousin, and talked to him about what it felt like to be the first and how difficult it was and what it feels like today to see the ramifications of your actions, but how slowly it's moving. So I have on my website on oliverrosellc.com, you can find Joanne's Overdue Book Club. My mother, my sister, my grandfather, all librarians, so we have a long history of reading in our family. But through that link, you can see some of the recommended literature that's out there that talks about these journeys. Some of them are related to athletes or authored by athletes, but I also have books like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which just talks about journeys, or Melinda Gates' book, The Moment of Lift. And these, and then my favorite is a parable that I was raised hearing, Stone Soup, which talks about the power of a community when they come together to create something that can feed the entire village just by starting with a stone and some water, and then everybody putting a little bit in. And to me, that is the perfect example of what it means to be an influencer. We talk about influencers as TikTok and likes and all of that, but if you have people's attention, what are you going to do with it? So be an influencer, but be an influencer for positive, for good. And quite frankly, the athletes I work with, if they have a large social media platform, what we're saying to them is do something that's even micro. Like I'm wearing my pin right now, from it's upside down because I have curly hair and it just wraps around it. But my pin for Athletes Voices. So if you have your Athletes Voices pin, you have something that's a conversation piece. Invite people to ask questions. Invite them to learn more. The other element that I really strive to do, and again, going back to You're Not Welcome Here, it's like have the tough conversation, but admit the areas where you need some education. So don't pretend to be an expert on things that don't involve you, but don't be afraid to ask the questions and to find out how you can be more inclusive and you can be more open to awareness. And Roy, you said something that I think is so important, and I want to go back to it. Let's let kids know that it's okay to make mistakes and that even their biggest heroes have made mistakes, but they've learned from it. And when we get to the point where we can say, I didn't know what I didn't know, but now that I know it, I'm moving forward and making my behaviors match what my values are. And we need to act in a way of forgiveness as well. So many of the athletes I work with, they've bumped into situations, and the ones who own them and move forward and do something to make the world better and use their influence to create momentum even after a mistake are the ones who are really going to make the biggest difference, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on, Joanne. I think that when you talk about that forgiveness, it's so crucial. I don't think there's any of us in this room that haven't made mistakes and haven't gone through things in our lives that have really impacted us. That we would go back and look at, be like, "Whoa, how did that
Mhm.
happen, or why did that happen?" And you learn from it. And I think you said you can see kids can see right through it. The
Mhm.
athletes that are genuine, that are remorseful for mistakes that they made versus a half-hearted attempt at sending out a tweet that apologizes but doesn't really
Mhm.
apologize. It's pretty easy to see through that, and I want to encourage everybody, whenever that time is in your life, because it will come for almost
Mhm.
everybody. Just recognize that people are forgiven, and when you ask
Recognize
for,
it and yeah, ask for forgiveness, right? But it's also it's about grit. And I'll very quickly just share my daughter. She's a freshman in high school right now. She's I will brag about her, but she's the U17 national champion for modern pentathlon. She's a competitive fencer. She's driven and determined, but she's quiet, very quiet. She just gets the job done. And when she was at her national competition last summer, she took a step back when she was in second going into the last event and thought about what she needed to do to win the title. And her thoughtfulness around that is a skill that she can apply in other elements of life. And when adversity is coming to you, that's why we look to athletes, because athletes have encountered
yeah,
all different types of adversity. And sometimes it's just in some sports, it's somebody who says something negative about you. You need to take that in, own it, and then move forward. It's taken me 48 and 3/4 years to get to the point where I can actually say I was wrong. Um, but I'm trying to open up the community and the community of athletes I work with to say, yes, I worked through addiction. I worked through uh, negative situations in my life. I can complain all day about what I didn't have, but really what I'm looking at today, and this is straight from the great Patrick Willis, who is one of my clients and one of my favorite humans. Um, I can be strong, I can be humble, but I can own my adversity and learn from it and break down those barriers for others that they don't have to go through what I went through to reach the places that I've reached. So thank you. I really appreciate you guys having me on today. I'd love to have people check out Athletes Voices. That's athletes with an S, voices with an S.org to find out more about what we're doing there, to watch our webinars. We are doing webinars the third Thursday of every month at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on a variety of topics. You can also check out oliverrosellc.com and find out more about how our athletes are seeking to create change. And of course, check out my brother's book on Amazon. So thank you guys.
thank you, thank you, Joanne. We appreciate your time. I know you. I know I speak for Kayla when I say we could sit here and talk for 2 or 3 hours about all of the different issues and the passion, and we can hear it coming through vibrantly in your voice. And you're so generous with your time. I know the Athlete Voices programs are incredible each and every month. I encourage people to check those out. On behalf of Caleb Bradham, I'm Roy Kessel, Sports Philanthropy Network, thanking Joanne Pasternack for joining us here live at Radio Row, Super Bowl 57 in Phoenix, Arizona. And for all of our viewers and listeners, we want to remind you to live generously.